We start with a news story that I actually reported on a couple of days ago, and I didn't make it the main topic of the video, but people actually decided that it was such a big deal that they talked about it quite a lot after I reported it on my video. The issue, or the thing that people have latched onto, is the shotgunner and firework technician combo. So I reported on the fact that the shotgunner can no longer be firework buffed by the firework technician. It can still be detection buffed, so it still can get hidden, flying and lead detections, even though the shotgunner, I do believe, has lead and hidden detection already, and it can hit flying enemies so long they are near the vicinity of a ground enemy, I think. However, here Nim, who is the head tester, said that I've seen a lot of conversation and feedback about the Firework Technician and some of its stronger combos, Shotgunner and most recently the Golden Soldier. While having these synergies is fun and creates a unique tower interaction, an issue arises with the amount of DPS being output, allowing primarily early to mid-game towers to carry you through nearly the entirety of the match, bar bosses, but they still perform relatively well even in the late game. Now, it should be made clear that banning said towers from interacting with the Firework Technician is not a desired solution. We took a lot of steps to balance towers and find creative solutions to issues within the time we had leading up to the Null and Void event. For example, we found that the hacker's enemy conversion was too strong in Night 3, so rather than nerfing the hacker, we added shield HP to many late game enemies as shield HP would not be converted, which is fair enough, and actually one of the benefits, I guess, looking from the test perspective, of using shield HP, because in the past shield HP has barely done anything, but here, since it's not converted over by the hacker, I think that the developers are now using shield HP a lot more. However, we did not have as much time for tower rebalancing as we would have liked. Although we did make attempts to address overpowered towers such as the Swarmer and the Archer, the Firework Technician was much more of a complex issue that would have required changing how the tower works internally, which was simply out of the development scope. Although that being said, being forced to choose one of the detections or one of the curses that allows the enemies to gain no burn detection would have been like an easy issue to that, or an easy fix to that, given that it's actually not that bad if you don't have the Firework Technician or any slowing down towers. So while banning anything is not what we would like to do, we had to make a quick decision. Ultimately, I'd like to revisit the Firework Technician at some point. This does not mean the Firework Technician will be nerfed, as I don't particularly think that the tower itself is the issue at hand, more so the interaction it has with certain towers under certain conditions. Likely in the future, the Shotgunner will be allowed to receive the Firework buff again. Now, it should be pointed out that the Firework Technician is not the only tower that is banned per se from receiving the Firework buff from the Firework Technician. If you were to check out the Firework Technician page on the wiki, you would find out that a lot of other towers, they are actually banned from the Firework Technician, whether it be bugs or on purpose. So for example, the Paintballer and the Demo Man, they can't be affected by the Firework Technician, nor can the Shotgunner, but as we've seen previously, it's not actually a bug. The developers purposely done that. The Medic is unaffected because it can't actually attack any enemies. The Farm is unaffected, even though it could technically damage some enemies through its Thorns ability through the Harvester, but that doesn't count. Military Base unaffected, fair enough. The Trapper is unaffected, which I think is fair enough. It doesn't really particularly attack towers, it just lays down traps, which allows enemies to run over them. The DJ booth is unaffected, the mortar is unaffected, the military base brawler and the accelerator is unaffected. The accelerator and brawler kind of make sense, they deal a lot of DPS in a short space of time, that's fair enough. The elf cam is unaffected, it just spawns units. The snowballer is unaffected, makes it the worst tower in the game. The Firework Technician can't buff another Firework Technician, the biology is unaffected, and the mecha base is unaffected. So some of these towers kind of make sense. So you got the splash damage towers like the mortar, the paintball and Demo Man. But that being said, I do believe the Rocketeer can be affected and it can hit multiple enemies, which doesn't make sense. It says infinite here because technically speaking, because the Rocketeer doesn't have a maximum amount of hits, it could affect a large amount of enemies. And I believe it's also the case for the Hallowpunk, one of the only towers to also affect multiple enemies and infinite amount of enemies. Other towers, for example the Jester and Chiromancer, they can affect multiple enemies, but since they have a max hit cap, it means that they are artificially nerfed. So in the case of like the Hallowpunk and Rocketeer, I think splash damage towers should be affected by the Firework Technician for the Firework buff, but there should be a limit. So I don't know, maybe a max amount of 5 rockets per shot should be like shot out, whereas for example when it comes to high DPS towers, maybe we're gonna have to engineer a solution to that, like the accelerator. The only thing I guess that we could expect is, for some reason, a rework of how the Firework Technician actually handles its Firework buff. In case you didn't know, there is an, I wouldn't say extremely complicated way of how it's calculated, but basically, this is the equation for the Firework shot chance cap for a Firework buff to be generated. It also, I think, depends on the level of the shotgun, and the higher it is, the more likely it is that it will actually generate a Firework thing. Now here you look at these stats and think, oh, there's a 50% chance of a firework being shot from a level 0 Firework Technician and a 100% chance of it being generated from a level 4 Firework Technician. Not the case. It's thrown into the equation at the top part here. So for example, if it's 1, it's just 1 over whatever is calculated here, and it also depends on the tower's fire rate on whether or not it will get a Firework Technician firework buff. And basically what we've calculated is that at 0.1 fire rate, it has about a 4.98% chance to generate a firework, whereas a tower with a fire rate of 1 has around a 7.59% chance of generating a firework. Although, so it looks like, you know, a tower that shoots faster actually has a greater chance of generating firework, because in those, like in the same time that a tower with fire rate of 1 shoots or can shoot a 7.59% chance of a firework buff, the tower with 0.1 has a 4.98% chance. So you do that 10 times and you're looking at, well, obviously if you're doing it by raw statistics, it's not going to be a 50% chance, but it's around that. You do have a greater chance of getting a firework buff from a tower in 1 second with a tower with 0.1 fire rate compared to 1. So in that regard, then yes, it is more likely that a tower with a faster fire rate, such as the minigunner for example, and the accelerator, except for one issue, well actually the issue being that it can't generate fireworks, then a tower with a fire rate of 1. However, a tower with a exceptionally high fire rate, such as the level 4 ranger, has a significantly higher chance of generating a firework per shot. But unless a tower's fire rate exceeds 12 with a level 4 firework technician, there is a 95% chance of it generating a firework. This is not guaranteed. Someone has generated a Desmos graph for this, so as you can see, if a tower has 0 fire rate, which is very unlikely, it has a 4.74% chance of generating a firework. A tower with a 2.6 fire rate has a 15% chance of generating a firework, and you could just scroll this along to see where it intersects. So a tower with a 10 fire rate has an 88% chance of generating a firework. Although, as we've established, a tower with like a fire rate of like between 0.1 and a fire rate of 1 does have, even though the Firework Technician, its chance is around 1, its chance is pretty low, around 5%, it is still going to be, you're still going to get more shots off from that tower compared to a tower with a fire rate of about 8, for example. Effectively, what Nim is saying is that they probably want to rework how that equation works, given the context of other towers. But given that this equation actually favors towers with a slightly, like, I don't know, towers with lower fire rates, so they shoot actually quicker, I don't see how the testers can actually like balance out, because if they were to reverse it and give towers with, say, I don't know, a higher fire rate, so they shoot more slowly, favourable odds, it means that stuff like the Ranger, its DPS will be buffed, although probably not by a significant amount, given that the Ranger does actually give out a DPS that is quite high. So actually maybe it could be more favourable in the developer's point of view to give the Firework Technician the buff the other way around. So the lower a fire rate of a tower, the less likely it is that it'll get a firework buff shot off, which is probably why the Soldier works so well. Its fire rate is so low, it is like 0.1, and it doesn't really affect it too much that there is a burst, or like a burst cooldown of about 1 second or so. That's not factored into the equation, so the Soldier is actually quite good when it comes to a synergy with the Firework Technician. It's not the only tower, so for example the Minigunner is also pretty effective. It's just that when it comes to like mid-game towers, they're effectively buffed quite significantly compared to the Minigunner, because it already has a high DPS. So I guess if the Golden Soldier were to be banned from receiving a Firework Technician buff, which isn't the case, Nim said that it's not going to be the case, then the next tower people would probably look to is the Militant Tower. I can very easily see, however, the developers also scaling the Firework buff to a percentage of how much that tower deals in DPS as well, or in damage. So for example, if a tower deals like 1 damage, for example, it would only ever buff it by like maybe a maximum of like 200%, so it would deal 3 damage. But I guess that's why the developers, or Nim, has said that it elevates mid to early game towers into late game status, such as the Golden Soldier, which was never intended for that purpose. But again, doing that would change the fundamentals of the Firework Technician so much that it would have to be reworked. So I guess expect a Firework Technician rework in the future, which would also enable things like the Shotgunner to be re-enabled. The only reason why the Shotgunner is so OP when it comes to the Firework Technician is not because of its fire rate. Its fire rate is actually relatively slow in comparison to these towers. The only reason why it can be buffed so heavily with the Firework Technician is because it can pierce multiple enemies and it can deal a lot of Firework Technician damage from that. It's not as many enemies as you'd think, it's only 3, but because it's a early to mid game tower, it can actually be significantly buffed early on, so that's why it was actually banned. It's not because it could hit an infinite amount of enemies, such as the Hallowpunk and the Rocketeer, although given this video being released, people will probably find a way of synergizing the Rocketeer and the Firework Technician, although again the Rocketeer is actually a mid-game tower to late-game tower, so perhaps it's not as effective with the Firework Technician as you would like it to be. Now, in other polls that Nim has posted, on the 24th of October, he said, not a balancing poll, but does TDS feel less laggy for you overall? Some people, 56% of people said it feels less laggy, and 44% of people said it still feels as laggy as it was previously. For me, it's as laggy as it was previously, and probably even slightly worse, given that sometimes my game does freeze. But for the majority of people, it says 56%. I guess I can't argue with that. Next, a poll of have you been instantly losing at the start of Wave 25 in Night 2 hard mode? 60% of people said yep. That was actually an issue. The developers have now fixed it, but there was an issue at the very start when Night 2 was released, where if you got to Wave 25 on hard mode, you'd instantly lose for some reason. Is Wave 25 in Night 2 too hard? 68% of people said yes, 32% of people said no. I said no because I was able to solo it. I don't think they've changed Night 2 a little bit, but they haven't changed Wave 25 all too much. Whereas, would you guys like to see a challenge trial for cursors after the event ends? No new cursors, just the existing ones for now. 90% of people said sure, so maybe expect a challenge modifier which allows cursors, which would be pretty cool. The results of this poll are not to act as confirmation that this will happen, though I do think it will be fun. So yeah, 90% of people said yes. How does Night 2 feel now? Waves feel better, but Curse RNG still feels a bit wonky. Fair enough. 61% of people said fair. Better. It feels balanced and fair. 25% of people. More waves need to be nerfed. Still are too hard. 14%. So not that many players feel like Wave 25 or like Night 2 in general is that hard anymore, especially with the nerfs. How should event towers be balanced? As side grades to other towers like the Harvester and Ranger, as niche specialists like the Sledger and the Swarmer, 70% of people said that. That's the approach that the developers have always had when it comes to event towers. They've had their own niches rather than having side grades. So I think this was in anticipation for perhaps the new tower, the Warlock Tower, to be released, given that it's more of an assassin and I guess a archer combination when it comes to that. Which, fair enough. So, I mean, it's side grades to 2 towers really in that regard. An example here being the Chiromancer, it's being aero effect focused, while the Freezer is very good at stalling singular enemies, which many people, if they go with the first option, would see as a little bit unfair, given that to have a tower that's a side grade to another tower, for example, that would mean that they will be locked out of like, I don't know, the ability to freeze multiple enemies at the same time, such as the Chiromancer. Re-add flying detection to the max level archer. 90% of people said yes. Archer's flying detection was initially removed to help address the issue of too many towers being able to handle everything. Same reason lead detection was removed from the Golden Soldier. I did speculate on that. However, after some thought, Archer is mostly designed to be a true jack of all trades tower, while with the other combined nerfs too, I can see why people may not be a fan of the changes, even if the tower is more balanced in the grander context of the game's meta. I think a good compromise would be to lock it behind an expensive upgrade so it retains some utility in some game modes such as Fallen. Reminder that not all balancing decisions are final, and this is just a temporary check from the community. So yeah, a lot of people are unhappy with the change that the Archer can't see flying enemies, but it's not confirmed that it will be got re-added, which, again, since the Archer was one of the first towers to get flying detection, yeah, I guess it makes sense, but who knows. Nim does confirm here that the cursors are not random for waves 6, 12 and 18 of Night 3. I did speculate on that. I did talk about that as well. Next is the Warlock balancing poll. 51% of players, so a majority of players, said it's pretty good. Okay, with only 20% of players saying extremely good and 15% of people saying it's alright. 8% is saying it could be better, and 6% of people saying, oh my god, bruh. So that's probably the worst option. And then finally, which of these player counts feel too easy for level 30 to 50 game modes, mainly Fallen, Pizza Party and Badlands? Select all that apply. To be fair, I think they're pretty balanced overall. I can't lie, maybe trios and duos, but let's see. So 46% of players said trios is overpowered, whereas 27% said quads are overpowered. And yes, to clarify, voting for duos and trios but not quads would imply that you believe duos and trios are too easy, but quads are more balanced. I do think quads are balanced overall, given that you get much less economy compared to trios and duos. Solos, yeah, it's quite difficult, so fair enough, but many people think trios are a little bit overbalanced. Why the Brazilian flag? Now, in other news, I record this on the 7th of November. In the past, it's been speculated that, or in fact the developers have confirmed, that the game passes for the Harvester and Slasher Towers will be stayed until the 5th of November. So, are these off sale? No, if you try and attempt to buy them, you can see here, you can still buy the Harvester and you can still buy the Slasher Tower. Now, if you go to the game page, you can also see you can buy the Warlock, fair enough, it's still one of the event towers, but you can also buy the Hallowpunk, even though that's been speculated to like go off sale much earlier, maybe like the start of November or even October. The thing is, the developers have not really said too much about the Hallowpunk, so I don't know when that's going to go off sale, but the Jester Tower, it also remains here, even though I'm pretty sure the developers speculated that it would actually go off sale for, it said limited time, but surely a month's sale is quite a long period of time. Like, it's been on sale since at least the 4th of October, and it's now the 7th of November. The Jester Tower has been on sale for over a month. Could it be considered an event tower anymore? Of course it still is, because you still need to buy it with Robux, but it's been on sale for quite a long period of time. Maybe one of the longest sales for an event tower that's returning, I think. Now obviously, even if the developers were to remove the game passes, you can still gift these towers, and the Slasher Tower, the gifting for the Slasher Tower has now been fixed. There was an issue previously, which I reported on, where you couldn't gift the Slasher Tower, but you can now gift the Slasher Tower. But interestingly enough, the Hallowpunk does not appear here, so you can't gift the Hallowpunk, but you can gift the Jester still. Although in all likelihood, when these game passes are removed, the developers will probably forget about this page, so you'll be able to still actually gift the Slasher Towers and the Jester Towers, even if they have been taken off sale. So do bear that in mind if you still want these towers after developers remove it. Also, a word of warning that the Battle Pass, it ends in 2 weeks and 4 days, and given the disparity between the event ending and the Battle Pass ending, I do think that the developers would probably want to end the event at the same time as the Battle Pass, because people, last time the Battle Pass and the event end were desynchronized, so that would be the Ducky Revenge event, where the Battle Pass, it ended like 2 weeks after the event ended. Many people were confused about why you couldn't actually beat the event, but you could still get rewards from normal game mode. So I think the developers would probably not want that to happen again, and they wouldn't desync it anymore. So the event will end at the same time that the Battle Pass ends. And given that the developers did promise that there'll be a Triumph of All Night thing, so Triumphs of All Nights very soon, which is where you beat all of the nights concurrently, so Night 1, Night 2 and Night 3 in the same game session, I think it's very likely that the event will probably last at least 2 weeks, which is the 2 weeks that's stated here, and there might be a update next week where the developers add the Triumph of All Nights, and you have 2 weeks to get that badge. However, the remnants of the Halloween event probably would not be removed, so for example, in the high grade crates, I don't think the Halloween consumables will be removed after this date. I think it will be removed only when the developers realise it in the Christmas event. So the Pumpkin Bomb, the Unholy Storm, the Necromancer's Tomb, I think they'll be kept around for a little while longer after the event, especially in the Triumph Rewards, because in case you didn't know, you can actually get these consumable items additionally in the Triumph Rewards if you beat Fallen mode, if you beat Intermediate mode, even if you beat the Knights, for example. The only thing where you can't get it is the challenge modifiers, because their Triumph Rewards are a little bit broken. But if you are missing on these consumables, because these are limited time consumables, don't forget, they'll probably come back for next week Halloween's event, but we can't guarantee that, then get these consumable crates and consume them. Or just beat a load of games to get a lot of these consumables, because they are limited time. And if there's ever a logbook like the Frost Spawner or the Siege Engine, as it's called by some people in the community, then the Pumpkin Bomb will be in limited supply. So I'd heavily recommend getting the Pumpkin Bomb just in case people want to get that logbook.